Enjoy.
Thank you. By the way, how should I address you? What's the proper way to address you?
Yeah, you can say Tenzin Rinpoche is fine.
Okay. Tenzin Wush, it looks like Wangyal, but it's pronounced what?
Wangyal. It's Wangyal.
Tenzin Wangyal. Wangyal. Okay.
No,
Please.
you don't have to say. You say Tenzin Rinpoche or just say Rinpoche is fine. Yes.
Okay. Rinpoche is probably easier for me. Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. It's easy. And I practice a little bit listening to your introduction. So Kristin Neff, right? That's
Yes. You can call me Kristin.
Okay, we are live. We are live and enjoy your conversation.
So hi everybody. Welcome to TWR Facebook Live. First of all, we wanted to apologize a little bit delay because we have some technical problems. So, but that's resolved. So we are here. So I wanted to welcome Dr. Kristin Neff, who is the Associate Professor of Educational Psychology at the University of Texas at Austin. And welcome, Kristin, to the Facebook Live here. And I just wanted to say just few words, and then I will really want Kristin to talk more and share more about her knowledge and her experiences here. So generally, I think the meaning of compassion, or in Tibetan, we say nyingye. So the compassion is something that I think many spiritual traditions around the world is somehow have very common sense of agreeing, same principle, around the same, a little bit different, but primarily, I think the focus is very much same. Within the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, I think with all the tenet system, doctrine systems, the compassion has always been a same agreed topic. But when it comes to a wisdom, there's so many disagreements, so many debates throughout the centuries. So I think we are talking some topic which is which most people agree. And but of course, there's always in a Buddhist tradition, there's always been compassion to others, but not that much of emphasis on self-compassion. I think for now, this topic about self-compassion has been very widely known, and I think Kristin definitely one of the well-known person who also not only academically speaking, but also the most important part is, I think, very experiential in her own life. Her son Rowan's situation, what brought all these experiences into a very much meaningful and lively way. And I think I listened some of the YouTube and TED, so it was very enlightening. So I would like Kristin to maybe say a few words about yourself, and then your personal experiences, and then maybe then we will move on there with the academic and research. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Rinpoche. Well, I'm so happy to be here. So, I did discover the concept of self-compassion when I started practicing Buddhism. I think compassion is a central tenet of all religious traditions. But I think perhaps what's a little bit different about Buddhism is because this, kind of at the core of Buddhism, is this idea of interdependence, that this idea of self versus others, separateness is actually kind of not true. In a way, from the Buddhist position, it doesn't make sense to have compassion for others, not for the self, because of course the self and other are intertwined. And I do think that's why it's a little maybe more prevalent in Buddhist traditions. Now, having said that, even though it's almost assumed in Buddhist traditions, the way I learned it, that of course you have compassion for yourself, the way most Westerners practice it, especially where there's a very strong separate sense of self, is by focusing almost entirely on compassion for others and forgetting about the self, or at least having a lot of difficulty having compassion for the self. So I think that's why there's kind of a need for it, especially in Western context, because it's so hard for people to unconditionally accept and have kindness toward themselves. So yeah, so that's kind of my way through it. I actually was studying with a group that Thich Nhat Hanh's group in the United States, the Community for Mindful Living, is where I first learned about it. And although I no longer practice in his tradition, he talks a lot about self-compassion. So that's really where it comes from for me. Yeah.
Wonderful. Maybe you can speak a little bit about the kind of work that you've been doing, this around 3 components about loving kindness and common humanity and mindfulness. Maybe share a little bit how you came up with the 3 versus only 1 or 4.
Yes. So I mean that's based on my reading of the literature. So I started hearing about self-compassion, like I said, when I started sitting with a group with that studied Thich Nhat Hanh's tradition. But people had written a little bit about self-compassion, and especially like Jack Kornfield's book, A Path with Heart, and Sharon Salzberg's book, Loving Kindness. And again, it was kind of in the oral tradition that I was sitting with, but no one had really broken it down explicitly. And I knew that I wanted to research this concept because I had done work with a self-esteem researcher. And as I was practicing self-compassion in my personal life, I realized it was such a good alternative to self-esteem in terms of a way to think about how to relate to yourself in a healthy way that didn't require feeling perfect or better than others. So I knew I had to come up with a clear definition so that I could measure it. So basically, I just read every Buddhist book I could get my hand on, and not even just Buddhist book, any book on compassion I could get my hand on. And from my point of view, I needed more than just the sense of concern for the alleviation of suffering, the kindness component. I mean, that one was pretty obvious, right? That had to be there. And kind of the motivation to help. That's all really part of what I call kindness. But I realized that there needed to be something that differentiated self-compassion from self-pity. In Buddhism, they make a big deal out of these being near enemies. Pity and compassion are really quite distinct. And what's the difference? Well, it is this notion of interdependence, right? So I knew, especially in a Western context, that I needed to include interdependence in the definition. Otherwise, I would just be talking about self-pity. So I actually call interdependence common humanity because I thought that outside of Buddhist circles, no one would know what I meant by interdependence.
Okay.
But that's really what it's pointing to. So first of all, understanding all the causes and conditions that come together in a human life to lead us to act as we do, so we don't have to blame or judge ourselves as like the sole responsible person for our actions. Actually, we're embedded in a much larger context, which allows for some forgiveness and acceptance. And also the idea that, everyone is imperfect. Life is imperfect. It's not just us. This is the way human life is. So that's why I include that component. And at first I thought maybe that was it, but then I realized actually that mindfulness had to be there too, at least from my perspective, because mindfulness is the core. In other words, we have to be able to be with suffering long enough to be able to open our hearts to ourselves. If we're caught in resistance, either, resisting, I don't want that, it's not okay, or trying to fix it, or trying to control it, or else getting wrapped up and lost in our thoughts, we couldn't be self-compassionate. So though really, this is, I suppose, my own contribution in that I don't think in the Buddhist literature I was reading, they were talking about mindfulness being part of self-compassion, but it was just assumed to be there. It was presumed that you are in a state of mindful awareness when you have compassion. And I realized, again, for kind of the Western definition, that I needed to be explicit in order to be able to measure it. So that's where my 3 components came from. I was a little worried that I may have gotten it wrong, but luckily, people who've thought about it more from the Buddhist perspective, I think they're okay with the definition. It may not be technically the way compassion's defined from a Buddhist perspective, but pragmatically, I think these three elements need to be there.
Yeah, I think maybe some sense of it's not always about philosophical, but it's also very much about experiential and
right.
what really makes differences in people's life. It might not necessarily always fit exactly with definition. Yeah, I understand that. Maybe let me ask you a question about these three components. So when you thought about it, you came up with this, and when you are now kind of working with the people in a more experiential way. So in the sequence of these three,
yes.
So does it really matter for you? Because sometimes it seems like a sequence matters a lot, because what you're trying to do is you're working with so many different individuals that they are all in a totally different places in their life, how they are feeling about themselves, how they are relating to their suffering and pain. They're different places. So some people, if you tell some people to sit with your pain, that was too much to tell.
Yes.
And if you say you have a little bit more compassion as you do, be kind to yourself like you be kind to your friends, oh, that's easy to understand, because it kind of involves personality, it involves emotion, some familiar images, so they know how to do it. But sitting with pain, that's not, nobody does it.
Yes. So I think in the moment, in any moment of self-compassion, you kind of have to start with mindfulness, in the sense that if you aren't aware that suffering is there, if you're just suppressing it or trying to think positive, you actually can't have compassion. So in the moment, I would say mindfulness has to be the first step. But in terms of training and kind of how you approach self-compassion, I think you're absolutely right. There are differences. Some people are better starting at the mindfulness. They learn mindfulness techniques. They learn to be stable with their painful experience, and then they can add in the compassion. Other people, it's just way too much to ask them to sit with their pain. They're just overwhelmed, and they actually need the kindness first before they can even be mindful. So I think that there are individual differences. But if you think about any particular moment of self-compassion, if there's no awareness of pain, it makes it impossible to have compassion, from my point of view.
Yeah. So your sequence is quite good in that way. So because first, for most of the people, I think to have like a loving kindness toward oneself, which in terms of the language, people understand, very familiar with that. And then once they become more familiar with that, then they're strong enough, settled enough or strong enough to sit with it. But in the beginning, definitely, I think it's probably, if you're trying to say sit with it. And sometimes I do feel like a mindfulness practices to people who are not ready is a torture.
It's a torture, you said? Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think there really are differences. So now there are multiple programs out there. I mean, the main program to teach mindfulness, at least in Western context, the non-Buddhist context, is mindfulness-based stress reduction. Our program is probably the most prevalent to teach self-compassion, mindful self-compassion. But also there's programs designed to teach compassion for others, like compassion cultivation training. And for some people, I think that's the easiest doorway in, because they're kind of used to that. They're on board with it. They know how to give compassion for others. Then they kind of slip themselves in, and then they're mindful. So I really do think there are different doorways into the same room. And it's nice that people have choices, I think.
Wonderful. So since we don't have so much time, I wanted to, make sure we take advantage of your presence here. So I think one of the important part of you is you doing your research on self-compassion. So I wanted to ask you how many research you have kind of done into self-compassion, and what is the most important one that you have done, and why you feel that's the most important? What is the most important finding in self-compassion in your research?
So, I mean, the nice thing is, I've just done maybe about 40 studies, but there are almost 1,000 studies now on self-compassion. I can't even keep up with the literature. Every year it basically doubles. So there's a real exponential growth curve. I mean, it's amazing. And it's hard to say what exactly is the most important study, but I would say perhaps the one that's most influential are the studies that are coming out showing that self-compassion increases motivation as opposed to undermines it. Because in the West, the number one block to self-compassion is people think they need to be hard on themselves in order to motivate themselves. And actually, it's not just the West. A lot of East Asian Confucian cultures also believe you have to be really hard on yourself to motivate change, to motivate achieving your goals. So there was a study that came out of UC Berkeley by Juliana Breens and Serena Chen, a series of 4 studies, including experimental studies, showing that if you help people be more self-compassionate when they fail, they're actually more motivated, first of all, to try again, and then to keep trying and to persist in their learning. So I think that kind of was slightly the turning point, because a lot of people would say, oh yeah, fine, well, it makes me happier, it makes me less depressed, but I won't achieve my goals. We're such an achievement-oriented society. But now we know it will help you achieve your goals, and I think that's kind of the tipping point for people, making some space for the idea of self-compassion. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So can you define exactly what's, in a short, what definition of self-compassion is from the way you work, and then can you sell where do you come with that definition? Does it has anything specifically in a tradition, or just how you see it?
Yeah, so again, there's these 3 components that I've used to define self-compassion. And actually it's 6, because each component has a positive and a negative.
Sure.
So it means treating yourself with kindness, the way you treat a good friend, caring for yourself, trying to meet your own needs, to alleviate your own suffering, as opposed to harsh self-judgment, which is being critical, judgmental, harmful to the self. So that's one component. Again, the second component is framing our experience in light of the common human experience. In other words, everyone is imperfect, everyone has an imperfect life. As opposed to the opposite of that, which is actually much more common, is people feel isolated when they make a mistake or when something difficult happens in their life. Even though logically they know that no one is perfect and no one leads a perfect life, it feels like something has gone wrong. When you make a mistake, it feels like, oh, I shouldn't have made that mistake. When in fact, why not? I mean, what is it? That's what it means to be human, is we make mistakes. So self-compassion really frames everything in light of the fact that this is a shared human experience. And then, like I said, the last one, the last component, I think needs to be there, at least to experience self-compassion. I define it this way: whether it's separate or related, it almost doesn't matter. I know to experience self-compassion, you have to be willing to be mindful of your pain, accept it. I mean, let's face it, we often don't even want to acknowledge when we're in pain. We would like to think about something else, or else we get so lost in problem-solving mode that we basically can't turn toward ourselves like a friend. We're just trying to make the pain go away. So we have to be mindful as opposed to being lost in the storyline of the pain. And the nice thing about this definition is it leads directly into interventions. For instance, if you want to do an experimental study and see how self-compassion changes behavior, you just have people first write mindfully, being aware that they're suffering this difficult moment. You have them remember that this is part of the human condition. And then you have them write to themselves with kindness like they would to a good friend. And that's how you kind of get people in a self-compassionate state of mind, and you can see how it changes their behavior.
Sure. So basically, I think your definition of self-compassion seems like a kind of very broad, like you're trying to include everything there. But typically, like in the Buddhist tradition, compassion in Yingye is defined very, very specific. It does not try to include everything from every piece.
Yes. Yeah, I think in Buddhism, it would be more just concerned with the alleviation of suffering.
Yeah, so basically it's the sense of may others be free from their suffering. So that's the willingness, wantingness, wishing that may people be free from their suffering. It's what definition of compassion or Nyingje is. And then that could be applied same way toward oneself, in a sense of deep, true wish to be wanting to be free from one's own suffering could be defined as compassion. But then when you include the mindfulness, I mean, in the Buddhist tradition, sometimes you can think about absolute compassion and relative compassion, which absolute compassion is more where you trying or when you are able to go beyond your personality and able to rest in that awareness of beyond personality and confront your pain. And that awareness, power of the awareness has ways to heal the pain if one is capable of doing that. But we said again before that when somebody is not capable of doing that, then the sense of treating yourself like your best friend, particularly when they're in pain, that I think is work very well, no?
Yes, yeah, no, I think that's right. I think my definition is a bit more general. Although I think it is true in Buddhism that there is this big difference between pity and compassion. And so I guess I wanted to be able to include that difference in the definition, although technically you wouldn't have to, right? But I think from the Buddhist perspective, pity would be when there's not that sense of interconnectedness or common humanity, but it's more like it's an understanding in which compassion is embedded as opposed to being the feeling of compassion itself. Wonderful. So I think that's true. Yeah, mine's kind of a pragmatic definition. So
let's say this way, maybe one part, I think, is there any, for sure, I think is that there's so much really like a healing, a lot of research proves that, I mean, through these ancient tradition, it's always been proved, and regardless of these new researchers or not, it's been always known to all the people, practitioners and yogis. But now we are, with the research, it's just confirming to ordinary people who don't have that level of knowledge, trust, or familiarity. So let's say this way, is there any false downside of that treating oneself, like talking about treating oneself like best friend? There are sometimes people do treat themselves too good. As a result, they begin to treat others not that good. So some sense of when the personality and patterns of self or ego or smart ego being too kind to oneself. So can you say anything about the downside of that?
Well, see, that's in a way why I have the other two components there, right? Because if it was just self-kindness and didn't include common humanity, in other words, didn't include interconnectedness, and also didn't include mindfulness, which is kind of clear seeing of what's happening, it could devolve into something where you've got maybe narcissism, or it could devolve into self-pity, or maybe self-indulgence. But as long as all three components are there simultaneously, it kind of protects it from turning into something else, right? It can't be self-pity if you have common humanity. It can't be narcissism if you have common humanity. Because it's not that I'm better than anyone else. It's actually just that I'm a flawed human being. All human beings are flawed. This is the way it is. So that kind of helps prevent it from turning into something like self-indulgence, something that it's not really.
Wonderful.
So again, that's why, from my point of view, like when you measure self-compassion, it's important to include the other two components, the common humanity and mindfulness, so that you know you're measuring true self-compassion as opposed to something that looks like it but isn't really. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So in terms of the working with individually, it might be kind of it's kind of difficult, right? A little bit challenging to see who is where and how they are actually. It's maybe a little bit challenging, I guess. To each person has to watch yourself a little bit more if you're going in which area, or you're having too kind to yourself.
It really rarely happens in a Western context. So my research shows that at least 80% of people are significantly kinder to others than they are to themselves. maybe 12% are equally kind to self and others, and it's only about 7%. And I haven't actually looked at them yet. It's new data. Very, very few people are actually kinder to themselves and others. It seems to go against our nature. And I think there's a reason for that, actually. I think it's because it's easier to help others, because when others suffer or in trouble, we aren't threatened. And when we don't feel threatened, we're able to give our best, we're able to be our best self, we're able to be soothing and nurturing and supportive. But when we fail or make a mistake or something difficult happens, basically we feel threatened. And when we feel threatened, we go into fight, flight, or freeze mode. And fight, flight, or freeze leads to the lack of self-compassion, right? We're trying to control things. We're trying to, like when we criticize ourselves, we think actually somehow we're going to be able to be perfect if we're just hard enough with ourselves. We just fall into this fallacy of thinking we can control ourselves and control our lives when we're in fight or flight mode. So I think that's why the vast majority of people find it easier to be compassionate to others than to themselves, because they're threatened when they fail in a way they aren't with others.
Wonderful.
It's kind of a biological thing, really.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. I think maybe if I know, like Anya, our producer, hosts there, will share some links of your work and information. And I think she probably is doing it right now. And maybe if you wanted to, maybe 5 minutes, if you wanted to guide just a short 5-minute meditation.
Yes, I would be happy to. I will teach something that's called the self-compassion break that actually uses the 3 components of self-compassion to generate a self-compassionate state of mind. Okay, so maybe everyone can close their eyes, right? So in order to experience self-compassion, in order for it to be real and not hypothetical, we actually need to call up a little suffering in our lives. So I'd invite everyone to think about some situation in your life right now that's causing some emotional difficulty. Okay, this may be a health issue, something happening at work, a relationship issue. And please choose something that's, troubling, but it's not overwhelmingly difficult. We want to learn this skill without being overwhelmed. So maybe some situation that's like a 3 or 4 on a scale of 1 to 10, but something that's really, a problem. So taking a few moments to think about what you want to work with. And calling the situation to mind, okay? So what's happening? Who are the people involved? What happened or what might happen? What are you afraid might happen? So really making the situation real and present for you. All right, then I'm going to be saying a series of phrases that are, again, designed to evoke these 3 basic elements of self-compassion. So the first phrase is, this is a moment of suffering. Okay, so basically we're bringing mindful awareness to the fact that this situation is really hard. It hurts, it's difficult. Okay, so I invite you to use any language that kind of validates this for you. Maybe something like, wow, I'm just really struggling right now, or this is hard. Okay, now the second phrase is designed to remind us of common humanity. So the second phrase is, suffering is part of life. Right? In other words, it's not abnormal to have things like this happen. This is part of what it means to be a human being. So again, see if you can find language that really gives this message to yourself in a way that makes sense. For some people, this may be you know, I'm not the only one who feels this way, or this is completely normal. Whatever message you need to hear to remind yourself this is part of what it means to be human. Okay, and so the third element we want to bring in is kindness. So I'd invite you to help us feel the kindness, maybe to put your hands on your heart, or you can kind of cradle your face, or give yourself a little hug if that doesn't feel too weird. Some physical gesture of kindness, maybe just holding your own hand, but really feeling the warmth of your own touch. And so the third phrase is simply, you know, may I be kind to myself in this moment. Right? I need kindness. This hurts, so I need some kindness and compassion. May I give myself the compassion I need in this moment. But often it's a little difficult to know what to say to ourselves to express kindness. So an easy way to do this is to think, you know, what would you say to a beloved friend who is struggling with the exact same situation you're struggling with? Right? Think about what words of support and kindness you might use with your friend, and also kind of the warm tone of voice you might use with your friend. And then just try it on with yourself. See what it feels like to be as kind to yourself in this moment as you would naturally be to a close friend. Okay, and then letting go of the phrases, you can put your hands down. So just to say, people will be having a variety of experiences. Some people will actually be feeling self-compassion. Sometimes when we give ourselves love, we immediately think of all the conditions under which we're unloved. And sometimes the reaction can be opposite. So just to say, if any of your listeners are having that reaction, know that it's part of the process. Self-compassion can feel a little awkward at first, and actually sometimes even bring up uncomfortable feelings. So, you know, it's all okay. The idea is we're just planting the seed of kindness with ourselves, and then just seeing what springs naturally. We're just nurturing the process without clear expectations of I'm supposed to feel a certain way. It's important to say that.
Well, thank you so much for this beautiful meditation. And thank you for all your work and informations. And I think we wish you the best to spread this beautiful mission work to help many, many, many people to free from their sufferings. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on. Thank you.